morning, Nigeria. Good morning, Africa. Welcome to the Good Morning Africa show on Housing TV Africa. I am Mimuna Bagudu. Now, today promises to be a very exciting one. We have a whole lot to discuss today. I won't be doing this alone. I have Joyce with me here in the studio. Good morning, Joyce. Glad to have you today.
It's an excitement to be here. Good morning, Memuna. You're looking nice.
Thank you
Radiant
so much.
as usual.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's the Good Morning Africa show, reaching you live from our studios, Housing TV Africa. I'm Joyce Owens. I'm delighted to be here. We have something interesting up our sleeve.
Very interesting. So, we always start off with a very strong, inspirational, motivational talk. I can make it, just to keep us on check and, remind us that every day we need to do better, we need to move better, and we need to push better. And then today we'll focus our attention on the ongoing protests, which started August 1st, with the youth going on the streets to chant the cause for a better governance, knowing fully well that things has been really not too good. I don't want to use the word bad. Things have really been not so good in the country. And, it's so amazing that it's all over the world.
It is.
Yeah, it's all over the world.
In UK, some protests going on, and in that video, I also saw some people looting shops.
Exactly.
So I think it's actually a trend. When
I
people
think
go
it's a
out to,
trend, yes.
put forth their grievances. It's also another opportunity for some hoodlums or people with bad intentions to, loot shops, destroy properties, and all of that.
Exactly. So we'll be looking at the impact of the protest on infrastructure, because once there's a protest, we have people that are on ground, just ready to take advantage of that particular protest, do a whole lot of things, vandalize government facilities, even people's, like you earlier stated, shops, their homes, and then they loot a lot of things. So we'll be looking at that. And what else do we have today?
The question, okay, before I get into that, I'd like to ask, you can also join the conversation. I'll just want to ask, do you think that our government or our leaders have been listening to what people are saying?
Well, I would say yes, because
there was a presidential speech.
There was a presidential speech that was not okay by me.
Okay.
Yes, so yes, in the course of our conversation, we're going to have that. Yes, there's a presidential speech, but I feel that that speech was, for the president to come out in the first place, was a forceful one, because he would have, come out even before the protest. You understand? Because this protest was announced. It wasn't that we all woke up one morning and then saw people on the street protesting against bad governance. No. There are phases to this protest. The people at the top would have, found a better way to, manage the situation, knowing fully well that the country is not, where it's supposed to be at the moment. People are hungry, people are angry, people are crying, people are dying. Okay. You understand? So
that will form the thrust of our conversation this morning. I bet you want to stay put throughout this program. So we'll see you after the break. Glad to know you're still there. You're welcome back. This is Good Morning Africa. Our focus this morning is the End Bad Governance protest, and we're looking at the impact of the protest on infrastructure. And doing justice to this topic is the Chief Executive Officer of Chi Green Limited. He's also a public affairs commentator, Mr. Goodwill Ogweife. Glad to have you in the studios with us this morning, sir.
My pleasure.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so first and foremost, yes, let's start with the definition of what a protest should be.
Protest is a form of speech. Across nations throughout history, protest has always been considered a way people express certain rights. And there were certain rights that have come to be part of what people call the Bill of Rights, like the United States of America have. Protest is seen as a tool to be able to petition government when you have grievances. There are other tools, but protest essentially is one of those tools.
Now, the End Bad Governance protest has also been tagged the hunger protest. Now, Nigerians took to the streets. Do you think that was the way to go? Or that should there have been another way of communicating to our leaders on what, the grievances are?
Obviously, when you protest, you are using an acceptable tool of communication.
Okay.
It's a tool available to democratic nations all over the world. One of the proponents of protest as a free speech tool to confront government was James Madison. He became the fourth president of United States of America and was one of the early founding fathers of America. He realized that for you to have a functional democracy and government, you must also have certain tools and certain organs
For feedback.
that you can use to hold government accountable. And one of those tools was freedom of speech. And under freedom of speech is protest, the right to form an assembly and to petition government against grievances you have. Then other speech include freedom of press and then freedom of religion. This came together to form an amendment in America called the First Amendment and was contained in a list called the Bill of Rights as we know it today. So it's an essential tool all over the world for people to talk to their government, because James Madison understood that for you to have a functional government, you must have tools to check government. And that when people have rights to form an assembly and then petition government against grievances they have against government, then that government becomes stronger, because you can now challenge government. You can now bring up political questions of importance and say, government, we don't like it this way. And then government has a right also to respond. In doing that, James Madison believed that there will be checks and balances in both government the world over.
Right. So our focus is the impact of the End Bad Governance protest on infrastructure.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Goodwill, for that very insightful and educative definition of what a protest should look like. But then we know that, just like you've earlier stated, the protest is a good channel to communicate to the government concerning the grievances of how the citizens feel. Over time, we have experienced protests being hijacked, hoodlums. People take advantage of this protest to do so many bad things. And one of the major things that they always target at is infrastructure. They start with attacking government facilities. We can see that in Kaduna. We can see that in Kano. In short, two government facilities were vandalized. We have the Kaduna Investment and Promotions Agency. We have Kaduna State Traffic and Environmental Law Enforcement Agency, and then also we have the newly established Kano ICT, which was actually established for school leavers, to go in there, take their trainings in the digital space. Now, these facilities were badly vandalized, and then the question comes to mind, is it that these hijackers are not in this country to see that this protest that they are taking advantage of is a channel or a tool for them to express their grievances to the government? Or is it that they are just, you know, blind to the whole situation on ground? Because it's so painful that in as much as we know that there is hunger in the land, nobody can dispute that fact. Removal of fuel subsidy has been something that has, you know, generated a lot of hardship for Nigerians. High cost of food materials, food items, high cost of living, transportation, a whole lot is centered around that. So now my question is, infrastructure is a social thing. So what do you think, or how do you see that these people that are taking advantage of this protest, what type of mentality do you think that they have for their country?
Interesting, Maimuna. What you just asked is loaded and contains a whole lot of issues. I think what you're trying to get at is to draw a line between protest and vandalism. Protest, you first need to know that protest is protected speech. But rioting is different from petitioning government against grievances you have. What a functional government or a nation does is that when people begin to protest, you allow them to protest, because it's a tool that enables government to hold itself accountable. But at the same time, government can also work in coordination with the protesters to single out those who are vandals, those who are troublemakers, who are rioters. But don't mix the two. Because part of a healthy country is that you understand that people have rights. Because government is not the creator. We don't worship government, we worship God. And then government must have institutions that hold it in check. And protest is one of those tools that will do that. And it is because of the lack of civic education. When James Madison came up with that policy in 1789, historians said it took him many months, because he was from the Commonwealth of Virginia, a state called Virginia. In those days, there were 13 colonies. It took him several months to go around from one colony to another. He did it both in writing and verbally. In writing, he was writing through a paper called the Federalist Paper in the US in those days, with another man called John Jay and Alexander Hamilton. They wanted to let people know what protest was, the true meaning of it. Another Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights doesn't only contain freedom of speech, but contains other things, right to fair trial and other things. So he began to write. Then he moved from representatives to representatives of different colonies and told them what free speech and what protest as a part of free speech is all about and what is not. And then brought these representatives together to come up with a document called the Bill of Rights, and then submitted it to the Continental Congress in 1789. And then it was adopted. For within 2 years, more than 3/4 of all the colonies had adopted it. It became part of the American Constitution. Nigeria is still in its infancy when it comes to democracy. And part of the things Nigeria needs to begin to look at is to create think tanks, consultative forums that can articulate what Bill of Rights are in Nigeria, what free speech really is and what is not. As you do this, people become educated, and people who are rioters are not protesters. The idea in Africa, in some part of the world, is that when you protest, you are violent. No. Protest is a tool, just the way you use the court system. it's one of the tools
Justice.
that is used to say, government, wait a minute, there's something you're doing that is not
not right.
acceptable.
Okay. Now, to show disagreement on some policies and some issues, that's part of this protest has actually been a platform for people to speak up. Now, what do you think the government may not have been paying attention to? What do you think they could actually do better? What are the lessons to learn from this? Thankfully, in Abuja, it has not been as um,
Chaotic,
you know,
like that of
like in the
some
northern
states in
states,
the
some
north.
other northern states. So, what do you have to say? What do you think government should actually learn from the past few days?
Of course, there's a whole lot to learn. You're beginning to see that even for a young democracy, barely maybe 60 years, and then in between military rule, that people now know they have a right to air their grievances. So government has to learn that you have to listen to the people. Number two, government also has to work with people to create consultative forums. It becomes a teachable moment for the Nigerian government to use this moment to create consultative forums, not the National Assembly, but forums that include even the protesters, labor unions, and people of interest that can talk about the political question for the now, which is hardship, inflation, and fluctuation of prices, and high energy costs, which people want to answer. So government has a lot to learn. It has to begin to create consultative forums. You ask the people, what are you really saying? Articulate it in bullet points. Then those consultative forums create a document. Government begins to look at, and then you can ask for a referendum. That for any time you want to make a move in this particular direction, particularly on energy cost, which is a key welfare tool of government throughout Nigeria's history. Nigeria doesn't have a history of good welfare system. But one of the things we do in terms of welfare is the subsidies. When government removes it, it's an issue of sensitive political question. And then you need to call the people together, not politicians alone, but the people who are also protesting, and say, let's put our minds together and see how will government address this issue. So the protest in the last few days shows government that you can't stop people from expressing their human rights, and that human rights are God-given. We don't worship government, but we worship God. So when it is God-given, people will find ways to express their rights. And then don't criminalize protest, but you can criminalize rioters. Separate protesters from rioters.
Okay, so let's go on a short break. When we come back, I want us to look at the president's speech. Okay? So viewers, let's go on a quick break. We'll be back shortly.
My name is Mrs. Mary Akimbami. I'm a Chief Marketing Officer.
Okay, welcome back from the break. If you're just joining us, this is the Good Morning Africa show on Housing TV Africa. Still in the studio, talking about the impact of the protest on infrastructure and the protest in general. Mr. Goodwill, you know, people are supposed to have, for me, I feel people are supposed to have a sense of ownership, you know, when it comes to, you know, handling buildings, public buildings, government facilities. You know, I have this sense of reasoning or understanding that the way I take care of my property should be the same way I take care of someone else's property, you know. But then we're still going to come back to, you know, the infrastructure and um, the advantages people take during the protest to, you know, attack buildings. So why is it that this sense of ownership is suddenly lost, you know, during the protest?
Interesting question. Obviously, there are a number of factors that do that. The first that comes to mind is because people have a mixed multitude, and then you may have people who are criminally interested in the gains of the protest. Then, protest also is a emotive, emotional, and if not properly checked, can digress.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is the organizers of protests must always keep their goals and purpose in check. And as well, government, working with government in coordination with government to ensure that those with criminal interest are not part of the protest. Besides, people don't know how powerful it is to protest without destroying infrastructure and basic systems that help government. Because when you understand the power of protest, you don't need to resort to violence. That was why people like Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi were leaders in peaceful protest. It took them time, but they got to their destination. They got those governments to bend. Because when you peacefully protest, there are underlying principles that drive you. A sense of purpose, a sense that your grievances must be addressed. Over time, it's been proven that even the most hardened will listen. That is why in different religions we say we should pray. When you pray, you're airing grievances to your maker. And after a while, your maker starts listening to you the same way governments are. As you constantly air your grievances, those grievances build up existing body of knowledge. Yeah. And those existing body of knowledge build up unstoppable force of nature that compel government to act. So when you resort to violence, you now taint that very noble cause. And that is why, in many cases, protesters must separate those who are criminally interested in the gains of the protest and focus on those who want to do it the right way.
Okay, sir, let me ask you a question now. We all know that public infrastructure should be used by policymakers to transform society and reduce the cost of living, you know, among citizens. Now, with all said and done, what would you say, what would you advise our policymakers that probably they could put forth in a time like this that will probably ensure that Nigerians are not sunk further into poverty, especially coming from the transportation sector? For instance, the ordinary man probably that was earning a certain minimum wage before fuel pump price rose up to 600 and something naira would now benefit from, because the public infrastructure is supposed to transform lives. So what would government be doing right, especially most efficiently at this time? Something that should be done as soon as possible.
When the Kenyans took to the street last month and a number of people were killed, under the urgency of the moment, the President Ruto, came up with a consultative forum. But Nigeria's issue hasn't gotten to that point. one of the things Nigeria's government can do is to set up an ad hoc consultative forum. Politicians from both houses of assembly, interested parties like oil and gas, labor unions, and the protesters, and make sure it is desensitized to make it political. You don't go and say every participant you pay them 500,000 per sitting or 1 million and make it a political thing to share money. You make it strictly a consultative forum that can attend to bare needs. They sit down and articulate issues Nigeria is facing. One of the issues the protesters are talking about is that the price for energy and fuel is too high. And it's having effect on other parts. Goods and services are expensive. For an oil-producing country, it shouldn't be so. So Nigeria has a political question it has to look at in the consultative forum. The president can bring in a team of experts to join them in the oil and gas, economics, professors. They are leading professors all over the universities in Nigeria who can be part of that team. You look at the first issue. Why is the price of fuel high? We already know we're an oil-producing country. Why is the finished goods to our masses really, really high? Obviously, the first thing that will come to your mind is corruption, bureaucracy, monopoly. These issues, when you begin to look at them, because corruption, there are people who gain when government import. There are people who gain when government cannot produce enough crude oil from our oil rigs. There are people who gain when the prices are high. Why are they gaining? Very often, they are members of the ruling parties, members of the oil industry, interested parties in other countries, in Europe, America, and Asia, middlemen, traders. All these parties have something to gain. Then that consultative forum looks at why that issue cannot be corrected. Of course, government has to look at people with integrity to now spearhead whatever the consultative forum comes up with. Because for many years, governments in power have always had subsidies taken illegally from whatever is paid as subsidy. There is a backroom corruption, under the table corruption that allows, where subsidies are paid, certain ruling elements in government take them for their personal use or for party use and all that. Then you have interested parties outside Nigeria. Then you have oil executives also. Government has to ask itself, what price does it need to pay to destroy that monopoly, that corruption, and so on? It is a momentous task because it has been there for many years, if not decades. And it will take a lot to stop those areas. But government has to do that. As it puts its heads together, ideas will begin to come in. What does it take government to improve the production of crude oil in the whole Niger Delta? What does it take it to ensure that that oil is not stolen? What does it take it to ensure that it is sold to local refineries at a reduced rate because it's Nigeria? And you need to provide a welfare system. What does it take government to ensure that the reduced prices are agreed with the refiners so that the price is lower than other countries? These issues, the consultative forum will begin to deal with them. A team of experts and public affairs commentators and labor unions and government parties. When they come together, the solutions will begin to come in.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. So I'm going to, stand on the last analysis you gave and I'm going to link it with the president's speech. Okay, during the live broadcast he did on Sunday, addressing the nation and also the protesters. And on his 11th point, I'm just going to briefly read out. He said, in the past 14 months, our government has made significant strides in rebuilding the foundation of our economy to carry us into a future of plenty and abundance. On the fiscal side, aggregate government revenues have more than doubled, hitting over 9.1 trillion naira in the first half of 2024 compared to the first half of 2023 due to our efforts at blocking leakages, introducing automation and mobilizing funding creatively, I beg your pardon, without additional burden on the people. Productivity is gradually increasing in the non-oil sector, reaching new levels and taking advantage of the opportunities in the current economic ambience. So I'm going to use point 11 because part of what the protesters are, protesting for is the removal of the fuel subsidy. Okay, that was the number one thing Mr. President mentioned when he was taking his oath of office. Subsidy is gone. Rejoicefully, everybody was happy, to hear that. Now, he has been able to outline, certain things in 14 months of being in government, what his administration has been able to do. Now, do you think that this is just on paper, or you think it's something that he has done, but there's no enough publicity for the citizens to know that, oh, in 14 months he has been able to do this? So the whole thing is mixed up for me, because if you're coming out to say in 14 months we've been able to do this, linking it to the the fuel subsidy that you initially removed while giving your taking your oath of office, the first day you came in as a president. So what's your take on that? Let's just hear your take on that.
Yeah. Okay. Maimuna, if I get you right, you are trying to ask, is government's assertion that it has delivered, is it really where it is? First and foremost, every president has a right to tell you what he has done, but you also have a right to also call the president to order where you feel he needs to do more. There are things that are expedient and urgent. That is what the protesters are talking about. One of the things that are expedient is that the price of energy and fuel is too high. The second issue that is expedient is that the currency is really, really devalued. The combination of these two factors has created an explosion of inflation and other unintended economic consequences that people now feel and call hardship. The president's argument is that we now want to be oil independent in terms of refining. We're building, refurbishing the 3 refineries in Port Harcourt. That's what he's getting at, in Kaduna and Warri. But people are saying the immediate issues, we don't feel if you've addressed them. The president is saying, in time it will get better. The people are saying, we don't really see clearly how you will get there. And that is where government needs to do more. And one of the first things government needs to look at is that why is Nigeria devaluing its currency? I think it's a discussion I would suggest we have on a different day. But let me throw light to the devaluation of Naira. When in 1986, leading experts from Harvard, working with World Bank or IMF, gave Nigeria a counsel to devalue its currency every week for 32 years. which this politician, Mr. Audu Ogbe from Kogi,
Former Minister of Agriculture.
former Minister of Agriculture, once spoke about. That was a recipe that the Nigerian government needs to revisit, that council. For early producing countries, countries that are not apex producers like China and America, when you devalue your currency, you lose automatically your comparative advantage to produce products that can compete with anywhere in the world. And virtually every president had devalued the currency, but devaluation of the currency took place under Babangida, troubled the economy. Took place under Abacha and Obasanjo, but to a lesser extent. Took place under Goodluck, but to a lesser extent. But became highly intensive again under Buhari, just like Babangida, and then under Tinubu. The IMF consultants or World Bank consultants will tell you Naira is overvalued. So devalue. But once you devalue your currency, you don't have that comparative advantage. I'll leave that for the economics to do the analysis. And because of that, your ability to import raw materials and produce in your country is significantly reduced. Mr. President, allowing the currency to devalue on the advice of foreign experts might be something he needs to go and rethink. And there are leading economists in Nigeria who need to. The second question is, why will Nigeria not find a way to make energy prices low for an oil producing country? In other countries where energy prices are high, they have other welfare. Nigeria doesn't have a very structured, well-structured and robust welfare system. People that can cushion the effect. When the president says he gives governors money to share rice, 50, 40,000 naira, that is not welfare. That is purely the wrong way to go. So Nigeria has to look at that political question. Why is the currency being devalued? The government argues that they have to borrow money to stabilize the currency in other dispensations, and it's not sustainable. But guess what? The Americans borrow money. The British borrow money. And they also pay welfare packages outside keeping their currency stable. Nigeria doesn't pay its citizens a lot of welfare packages. We don't have free health care. We don't give free education from nursery to secondary school. We don't pay people salary when they don't work. We don't provide good roads. And then the only welfare package people have, which is subsidized fuel, you take it away. You want to charge the price of fuel the way it is in Europe and America. Those two nations or those two economies are quite
contrast.
Developing and a developing nation are different. So the president has to go and revisit it. And the easiest way to do is to bring in a team of experts. We have to address the issue of devaluing Nigeria's currency. And remember, IMF and World Bank are the organs of the Western world. The Western world are good people, but they have their interests. And they sell their interests through their international institutions. Every World Bank president must get some level of political support from a sitting US president to be president of World Bank. Likewise, IMF. Europeans have a role in shaping who becomes an IMF president. These organs help serve the interests of the Western world, but not every counsel they give is correct. They are helpful, but you must query them. And the Nigerian government have professors, leading professors in business schools all over the world and in Nigeria, he can put together in a consultative forum, they will give him ways not to devalue the currency, to give Nigeria a comparative advantage, and then help the economy improve. Why will a dollar to naira be 1,500 naira? We're not one God-forsaken country. Yeah. What is the government doing? Allowing the currency to be devalued. So we can't buy raw material from India, from China, and we're losing jobs. Because as you lose your comparative advantage, anytime you import finished goods, because you can't produce goods in your country, you're importing joblessness. Anything you import means it is not produced in your country, and it serves the interest of other countries. This is where the Consultative Forum comes in, a team of experts who will help the president move in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ogbuefi. That has been some insights. Thank you so much, sir. We're not done. We're not done yet. Now, yes, we have all of these issues on the front burner in front of us. And what would you say the government probably is getting right? I know that for me, if I was Mr. President, I would certainly want to deliver governance to my people. Now, specifically good governance. Now, if we were to actually do an X-ray, what would the APC government led by President Tinubu be getting right actually at the moment?
That is a good question, Joy. The president, as he stands, has talked about refurbishing the old refineries. On the national dailies, we'll be told that before the end of the year, if that date is kept by the government, that is an achievement. That is one of the few things you can say will be cheap because you are in an oil producing. And then that the prices are part of the only essential welfare package that a developing country like Nigeria can provide at the moment for its citizens. If you don't provide that, what else can you provide? You don't provide Medicare. You don't provide free education. You don't provide good roads yet. You are still, most of our roads are 50% in a bad state. So you find out that the price of that fuel has to be one of the targeted goals of this government.
Okay. I think that was even number one, top on the list of the protesters.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the policies that should be reverted as soon as possible. Now, I won't be talking about infrastructure without mentioning one of that part captured in Mr. President's speech, and that was the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway. He also mentioned the Sokoto, Badagry highway projects that is also underway. All right, so you're watching Good Morning Africa from Housing TV Africa, and we've been having this conversation with Mr. Goodwill Ogbuefi, Executive Director, Chi Green Limited. He's also a public affairs commentator. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. You've actually done some justice in tackling some of our questions. Lemina, further questions?
For me, I don't think I have further questions. I just want Mr. Goodwill to, speak out to Nigerians there. Nigerians are angry. Nigerians are not happy. There are a whole lot going on. People are hungry, no jobs, no security. I understand that is a phase that we need to, go through. Even presently now we have other countries to, protesting for a better governance, not just Nigeria alone. So just give out some experience out there.
Obviously, the protest for all Nigerians is a good idea. Let it remain peaceful. Fish out those who are the rioters. Rioting is not a tool of change. Protest is a very powerful tool when used peacefully. And Nigerians must continually bring up these issues of great political questions before their leaders, either through protest or through writings in the national dailies or media setups like you. But we need to hold our government accountable to address these great political issues, because it is in doing that you build a country. I talked about the America, how a founding father spent many years going from colony to colony, telling the people to come up with a Bill of Rights. It's also time that in our constitution that it becomes a very strong part of us, that we have a Bill of Rights, clearly and clearly written, added as an amendment to our constitution, that addresses issue of how to seek redress when you have grievances against government, building specialized courts, setting up consultative forums that are not political, where government and the masses can meet. My prayer is that this will not lead to violence, but that this protest...
Further violence, you wanted to say.
Yeah.
Yes, to further violence.
Because
Yes.
it actually created,
yes,
yes, in some states.
Yes, further violence.
Yes.
But rather, it will lead to a national debate, a national discussion. A consciousness is awakened. We begin to dream of the Nigeria we all dreamt of when we were children. And that someday, in the midst of these, our leaders will begin to find solutions. And our government begins to listen. Because when people protest and you don't listen, this happened when the British Empire was of America in 1773. There were a series of protests against a particular tax, just the way it is. Then it was a tea tax. And that protest took place in 1773 against the tea tax that the government was favoring a company called the East Indian Company. The then government, British government, led by Lord North, didn't listen. Eventually, that led to a civil war. So government needs to listen. That civil war led to the War of Independence. When people begin to cry, government must listen. In fact, people said if Lord North had listened to those protesters in 1773, protests like the Boston Tea Party in America, that led to destruction of tea products that were imported from Britain by the East Indian Company. They were damaged. That led to a civil war. So when people begin to protest, government must listen. And you must address that issue now, not tomorrow. You can't tell citizens to wait for 2 years before there is a change.
Nigerians are actually done
Nigerians are really barely surviving. They are actually on life support. So government has to do something in the nearest possible future to bring down the prices of fuel and work towards helping our currency to gain its strength against the dollar. We must, and the way to do it, bring a team of experts, economists, business experts, industrialists, politicians, sit them in one room. They will come up with ways to solve it. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. It's always a delight to have you with us.
Today's episode of the Good Morning Africa has been, quite a very interesting one. Having Mr. Goodwill with us in the studio, talking about the impact of the protests on infrastructure. I really hope that Nigerians will do better in the course of protesting. Just like what we said, protesting is not a bad thing. It's just to channel your grievances to the government, because you can't see them. Certainly you can't go to the villa or the National Assembly freely and then start shouting. No, you just need to go through the protest channel, a peaceful one at that. And then for those that are out there, taking advantage of the protest, we really hope that you see the good side of this particular protest that some citizens are coming out to chant the cause to the government. We should all do better, be better citizens, and do right by the government as well. Joyce, do you have any input?
Well, rioting, like Mr. Goodwill said, is different from protesting. So, well, when you're out to protest, you protest and do not riot. We actually got some reports about some quarters hijacking the protest, by sending hoodlums. So we just trust and pray that everybody has the Nigerian dream on his or her mind. We have a lasting cause to want a better country. We demand, and it is a fundamental human right to demand good governance. So we just trust that in rounding off the 10-day bad governance protest, we don't want any more loss of lives. Please, you're protesting, protest. You're a policy maker, do not send hoodlums to the streets to cause mayhem. We do not want that. So that has been the show. It's been a privilege to be with you, Memuna.
Thank you so much, Joyce.
We'll
I had fun. We'll do this another time. Thank you so much to our viewer out there watching us. We've come to the end of the Good Morning Africa show. You can watch this episode and subsequent episode by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Housing TV Africa. We're also on all social media platforms at Housing TV Africa. Good one. You can also download the Housing TV mobile app to stay connected wherever you go. I am Memuna Bagudu. Thank you so much for sticking around, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
I'm Joyce Mosu. Enjoy the remaining part of your day. Bye for now.
Bye.